Oren?
Susan, were you trying to get a hold of us?
John was out in the attendees, but I see he got moved over. Thank you. I just wanted to be sure he got moved over.
Okay.
We kind of need the mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. You going to share that tea, Laura?
Well, if it was tea, I would share it, but it's hot chocolate, so I'm keeping it all for
Oh.
myself.
That's even better.
Yeah.
And Andy, I feel like I'm in the wrong meeting with you on this meeting.
Well, I hope not. I hope I'm in the right meeting.
Oh, good. Just like Andy.
Nice to see you, Susan.
Nice to see you.
Well, I've got 6:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Ms. Burgess, do we have everybody we need here?
Yes, we do.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the joint meeting of the Cotati City Council and the successor agency to the former Cotati Community Redevelopment Agency for Tuesday, October 26, 2021. Can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Harvey.
Here.
Councilmember Sparks.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
I will show Vice Mayor Linman absent and Mayor Moore.
Here, thank you very much. I would like to take this opportunity to express our patience with our meeting delay. We had the fortunate opportunity to do a ribbon cutting for our new SAFE program in collaboration with the City of Roanoke Park. So that was a nice little opportunity and looking forward to that program up and running. So thank you very much for your patience on that. With that, I will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
To the flag.
of the
United
United States of America
Of America.
and to the republic for which it stands, one
One
nation,
nation.
under God,
Under God.
indivisible,
Indivisible.
with liberty
With liberty
and justice for all.
for all.
Thank you all so much. I was thinking about it today and thinking about the opportunity we had to initiate the SAVE program for those people in crisis. And I thought it might be an appropriate moment to take a moment of silence and to think of all the families and people and friends that we have lost to this tremendous, horrific pandemic. We were hoping by now that it would be over. So if you would indulge me for a moment, just a moment of silence and recognize those that have suffered under that. Thank you very much. And now I would be looking for, oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Obed, would you kindly introduce our staff that are here tonight?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So tonight, obviously myself, City Manager Damien Obid. We have our department heads, starting with the Police Chief, Michael Parrish, our Community Development Director, Noah Hausch, our Public Works and City Engineer, Craig Scott, and our Director of Administrative Services, Angela Corder. And of course, we also have Lauren Burgess, our City Clerk, and John Bacher, our City Attorney, here tonight with us.
Thank you, Mr. Obid. So, with that, I would look at an approval of our minutes.
Move to
Yes.
approve the minutes. Do you want them separately or all together?
I would defer to Mr. Bacher on that. I think we can do them all together, or do they? Okay.
Second that.
So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Burgess, if you kindly give us a roll call on that.
Councilmember Harvey,
Yes.
Councilmember Sparks,
Yes.
Councilmember Ford,
Yes.
Mayor Moore.
Yes, thank you very much. So now we'll move on to announcements. Meeting orientation for new attendees and viewers. In conformance with the Brown Act and the adopted City Council rules, the meeting agenda includes items labeled as action items where the City Council will consider the item and citizens are afforded the opportunity to provide comments relevant to the item being discussed. The meeting agenda also includes a citizens business item, which is a designated place on the agenda where citizens have the right to say whatever they wish. The City Council may or may not choose to respond to comments as the government code allows. However, if the City Council declines to respond, it should not be perceived as giving credence to or agreeing with any of the statements that the City Council or its members believe are incorrect, misinformed, or purposefully biased. Measure S supports police services, a variety of recreation programs for all ages, and the maintenance of our streets, parks, and public buildings. See details on the web at cotaticity.org. Citizens interested in receiving City of Cotati community alerts via text or email are encouraged to sign up with Nixle by downloading the mobile app from the iOS or Android App Store or by texting your zip code 94931 to 888-777. And like always, we love to hear from you, so please feel free to contact the city at 707-792-4600 or info@cotaticity.org. If you have a non-emergency issue after normal business hours, you can contact us at 707-792-4611. And of course, if you have an emergency, please contact 911. Continue to look for updates on the city's website and social media channels available on Facebook, Instagram, Nixle, and Nextdoor. And finally, the Cotati Historical Society, CHS, will host a community gathering and reopening of the Historic Museum on Sunday, November 7th, 2021. Feel free to explore what's new between the hours of 12 noon and 3 p.m. The museum is located inside City Hall near the west side entrance. Parking is available on East School Street. COVID-19 precautions will be in place. And if you've never had an opportunity to view the museum, I would encourage it. It's a wonderful little gem. Now we'll be looking for approval of the final agenda. Any changes to that, Mr. Obid?
No proposed changes, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to citizens' business and public comment for consent calendar items. Any member of the public wishing to speak to the council on any items listed on the consent calendar or any matter not listed on the agenda that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council may do so at this time. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the council is not allowed to consider issues or take action on any item not listed on the agenda during this period. Pursuant to City Council Policy 2021-01, comments of any member of the public are normally restricted to a total of 3 minutes in length per person for matters not on the agenda and a total of 3 minutes per person in length for any and all items on the consent calendar. The mayor may extend the time limit for a reasonable time where a disability accommodation has been requested. And with that, we'll move on to, we'll open it up for citizens' business.
Thank you, Mayor Moore. Looking to our attendees tonight, if you'd like to make a public comment, please use your raise hand icon, or if you're dialing in, dial *9. Merlin Coleman, go ahead.
Merlin, I believe you're muted. It looks like you're still muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I am up on Cypress Avenue, 8844, working on starting a farm up here. And I think that you all might be working on prioritizing the rezoning and ag that you have on your agenda. And I'm just very hopeful that you're able to do that. I'm in support of that. I have a beautiful farm started here that we feel has a lot of support, but it seems that it's not, somehow the zoning isn't lining up with the city's general plans. So I'd like to encourage that happening, and thank you all so much for putting all the effort in that you do down there. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Mayor Moore, that will end public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Burgess. Now we'll move on to consent calendar item 8A and B. And we are going to separate these two items, and because we have a recusal on item 8B by Councilmember Harvey. So I would look for a motion to consider item 8A, acceptance of the 2021 pavement preservation project.
This is Councilmember Harvey. I would move that we approve item A.
This is Councilmember Ford. I'll second that.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Can we please have a roll call?
Councilmember Harvey.
Yes.
Councilmember Sparks.
Yes.
Councilmember Ford.
Yes.
Mayor Moore.
Yes. Thank you very much. And now, I don't know if on a recusal, our council member that has to recuse herself has to step out of the Zoom, or she can just.
Well, because it's
I have
on a
a
consent calendar, she's not required to leave the room, but she does need to make a quick statement about the nature of her financial interest.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Councilmember Harvey.
Okay, thank you. I'm recusing myself from item 8B on the consent calendar because it involves the proposed Cypress water tank, which would be constructed on property that is adjacent to my personal residence. Because this is a consent calendar item, I'm not required to leave the room, but I would request that item 8B considered separately so I can recuse myself. And I would ask that the city clerk please have this statement included in the minutes.
Thank you, Councilmember Harvey. With that in mind, I would look for a motion to consider 8B.
I move that we approve item 8B.
And I second that.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Burgess, roll call, please.
Councilmember Sparks.
Yes.
Councilmember Ford.
Yes.
Mayor Moore.
Yes, thank you very much. We'll show that as 1 recusal, 1 absent, and 3 yes. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to direction on future agenda items. Do we have any other items we want to present to our existing staff for consideration at this time?
Mayor Moore, I have just one item.
Thank you, Councilmember Hart.
And that would be the Sonoma County Waste Management Agency approved a memorandum of understanding item, and it needs to come to each of the jurisdictions for 1383 for them to be able to help with that for all the cities, but each city will have to go through and approve that MOU with the Waste Management Agency because it isn't in our current JPA agreement.
Thank you. Councilmember Harvey, do we have a certain time restriction on that?
As soon as possible, but as soon as we can get it on the agenda, it would be good because as we all know, 1383 is coming down the railroad tracks pretty quickly. So,
and that's due to be implemented January of 2022.
Yes. Correct.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ford.
This was raised by Councilmember Sparks last meeting, but because there's a member of the public asking about it here, I want to reiterate my support for putting updating our zoning to match the emphases in our general plan on the agenda as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Ford. And of course, we will be discussing that in our priorities as well. So thank you so much. Okay, now we'll move on to our regular agenda, item 10A, presentation on the draft Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And this is Mr. Scott will be presenting this.
I will make a brief presentation and let the GSA staff take over from there. Yes, thank you. So Craig Scott, Public Works Director, City Engineer. Tonight we are to receive a presentation on the draft Groundwater Sustainability Plan. With us are staff from the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, Andy Rogers, who's the administrator, and Marcus Trotta. He's the resident groundwater expert with Sonoma Water. As background, well, we have Council Member Susan Harvey is on the board of directors for the GSA, and I'm sure she would be delighted to have input, to welcome input from the council on the draft plan. I'm on the advisory committee and for the GSA, and we have both been reviewing and we have been presented with draft chapters from the plan for, and Andy Rogers can correct me, during the presentation for at least the last 2 years. And then those sections have also been brought before the board for their input. So at this time, I'd like to go ahead and have Andy Rogers and Marcus Trotta make the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Andy Rogers. As Mr. Scott said, I'm the administrator for the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency. It's nice to see our Vice Chair, Harvey, tonight, and the rest of you being my hometown council. So it's a pleasure to be here. So we are going to go through just a very brief overview of the GSA, and then which is the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, just to remind you what this agency is, and then our central project that Mr. Scott mentioned, preparing the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, and Marcus Trotta, who is leading that effort, is going to talk about that. So next slide, please. So in the last drought, there was a landmark law passed in 2014, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And basically that required basins identified by the state to form a groundwater sustainability agency, which is what in Sonoma County, there are 3 such basins: Petaluma Valley, Sonoma Valley, and the Santa Rosa Plain. And the Santa Rosa Plain is where the city of Cotati lies. And so this is what was a law that started this whole process. Next slide, please. So there's some confusing lines here, but we are looking at the Santa Rosa Plain groundwater basin. And so for the light gray, surrounded by the dotted blue, light blue, is the groundwater basin, and it's defined by the surface geology, not by city boundaries and those kinds of things. And it's essentially the valley floor. And so what we're looking at is the city of Cotati is at the southern end. North of Windsor is the north end, and then it goes from west, from Sebastopol to into Santa Rosa. Next slide. So this is hard to read, but essentially the way the Groundwater Sustainability Agency is constructed, we have 10 member agencies, the city of Cotati being one of them. And then we have staff, which is I'm in the box down to the left. And then we have the advisory committee, which is 18 members, of which Mr. Scott participates. Next slide. So why are we doing this? Is we're asked to sustainably manage our groundwater in the basin that I outlined in that map for now and in the future. And we need to meet the requirements of SGMA, which is the State Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the requirements of that. So that's why we exist. And what we're here to do is we're preparing a GSP, so a whole bunch of new acronyms for everybody, Groundwater Sustainability Plan. So we're making sure our plan that we're developing, that we're going to talk about tonight, reflects the goals and priorities of our basin community, and to be as cost effective, of course, and efficient as possible. Next slide. So we talked about the formation, which was in 2017. The agency was formed and started. And so we are in step 2, which is, it's been a few years, as Mr. Scott mentioned, of developing a groundwater sustainability plan. I'll tell you a bit more about that. Next slide. So a groundwater sustainability plan it's required by the state, as I mentioned, and it's something that we've developed locally, and it's based around structure provided by the state, but it's both developed locally and implemented locally. And it will give a picture of what the basin conditions are. Is it healthy? What are the issues associated with it? And then we need to pay attention to that. We're not going to submit this plan and then be done. We have to adaptively manage going forward. And every 5 years, we need to update our plan. So these plans are not optional. The plan itself is not subject to CEQA. And we get this question a lot, why not? The projects that may come from the groundwater sustainability plan may be subject to CEQA, depending on what they are. And really, the reason we're doing that is not just a direct response to our current drought. This is a long-term plan. And it includes funding plans I'm going to talk about also. Next slide. And basically, these are just to answer 3 core questions, and these are in order. What are the basin conditions today and in the future? Are these conditions that we've defined sustainable? And how can the basin achieve sustainability by 2042? So it's a 20-year plan. And I think this might be my last slide before I turn it over to Marcus. Can you go to the next slide? One more piece of information. You know, the basin, most of the water that's used in our basin with all the cities and the rural residents and the unincorporated areas of the basin, really 45% of that water is imported, but we have 35% of all the water we use is from groundwater. So this is an incredibly important component of being sustainable going in the future. Next slide. And there are a lot of wells, and that's kind of the headline to this slide. But what it shows in the different colors is the density of wells. So the darker, warmer colors are where there are more wells, and we don't have every well mapped, but these are the ones that are known throughout the basin. And you can see the basin shape. The larger shape around that is the watershed. So the watershed will shed into the valley floor where the basin is located. Next slide. And I just wanted to point out where the groundwater sustainability plan is found. It's on our website. And I believe there's also hard copies available at libraries and perhaps at City Hall. But we also provide information. Drought is obviously on everybody's mind. I know the storm, maybe it's all over now, and I don't think so. Drought is here to stay. So we're going to be constantly providing resources and information around how a rural welfare, or if you're a small water system, or an interested person to manage water better, we're going to be constantly providing information. And so I think that I'm pretty sure that's my last slide. I'm going to turn this over to Marcus Trotta, who's been leading development of the groundwater sustainability plan. I'll tell you more about that.
Okay, thank you, Andy, and good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Pleasure to be here this evening. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. As Andy mentioned, my name is Marcus Trotta. I'm a principal hydrogeologist with Sonoma Water, and we're serving as a staff to the GSA, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, through a contract, technical services agreement. And so our group is, along with consultants, are leading kind of the technical aspects of the groundwater sustainability plan development. And what we're showing here is essentially the overall table of contents. These are all the different sections of the plan. It's quite a very long and technically complex document that's required to have a lot of information and documentation of how we're setting thresholds and criteria and selecting projects and management actions. And so you can see all of the components here and what's included in them. I won't read through all of that, but did just want to kind of point out some of the key sections that are shown in bold there, with the first being the executive summary. So this would be a good place to start for someone who's interested in information within the plan. There's a high-level summary of what's in each section of the plan itself, along with some key figures. Section 4 is the sustainable management criteria, and those are really the thresholds and objectives that are set for the basin, and those criteria determine how we locally define sustainability for this particular basin. So with SGMA, the state does provide locals, these local groundwater sustainability agencies, to define how sustainable conditions are within their own basins, within certain requirements and standards that the state has developed. So that's an important section. And then projects and management actions, that describes the different projects and actions that are proposed to either maintain or achieve sustainable conditions within the basin by 2042. So within a 20-year time frame, and then SGMA requires that we remain sustainable for another 30 years. So there's a total 50-year planning horizon associated with the GSP. And then the implementation plan is where you'll find a description of all the different activities that the GSA will be required to implement, with really a focus on the first 5 years of implementation. SGMA requires annual data reporting, quite a bit of monitoring, assessment of data gaps, and so that's a big component of our plan, as well as collecting more information and filling needed data gaps. This is also where you'll find a schedule, as well as a 5-year budget that's estimated for the implementing the plan. Next slide, please. So the basin itself, as Andy pointed out, has a wide array of different stakeholders, as well as different water sources. And here we're showing kind of geographically where those different types of water sources that Andy showed on the pie chart are utilized, with the imported Russian River water being utilized primarily by the larger, urban areas, the cities within the basin that are contractors to Sonoma Water for deliveries of water from the Russian River system. The exception being the city of Sebastopol, which is 100% reliant on its local groundwater supplies. Other water sources that are shown, actually are not shown on this map, that we have a corrected version of this map that didn't make it into your presentation, but in purple are areas that receive recycled water, and unfortunately this map is just showing those parcels that are receiving recycled water from the airport treatment plant. There are a number of other recycled water parcels, including some, I believe, in Cotati, that receive water from the Santa Rosa, City of Santa Rosa sub-regional system. So that's a very important source of water to our basin and helps offset the use of local groundwater. And then in the kind of the brownish colors and kind of reddish brownish colors are areas where rural residents, farmers, some commercial businesses rely pretty much solely on groundwater within the basin. Next slide, please. So I mentioned those sustainable management criteria as being kind of key to the how we define sustainability in the basin. And what those criteria look like are they are essentially thresholds and objectives that Sigma requires us to set for 6 indicators of basin conditions or health. And in this basin, there are 5 indicators that are applicable to the basin. One of those, seawater intrusion, is not applicable to the Santa Rosa Plain because we're not connected to a source of seawater. But the others include the chronic lowering of groundwater levels, the potential for land surface subsidence, lowering of the land, irreversible lowering of the land due to groundwater pumping, degradation of water quality that's caused by groundwater conditions within the basin, the depletion of surface water from streams is another indicator that that's included, and then the decline of the amount of groundwater in storage within the basin is the 5th indicator that requires assessment. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give a real high-level snapshot of kind of the overall conditions. The GSP includes a section 3 called the basin setting that goes into what we know about the basin in quite a bit of detail. And so starting out with kind of the good news category is that for groundwater quality, for the purposes of implementing the GSP, is generally acceptable within the basin. There are certainly some areas that do have some challenges in terms of naturally occurring constituents or releases from land surface that can cause problems. But for managing the basin for Sigma purposes, the overall groundwater quality is generally acceptable. And the GSA's role in water quality is really to make sure that they don't do any harm to the basin with the projects and actions that they're going to be doing. There are many other agencies that already are regulating water quality, such as the regional water quality control boards and the county in some areas. The other kind of good news side is we don't have any evidence of irreversible or inelastic land surface subsidence that's occurring due to groundwater pumping within the basin. And that's because for the most part, when we look basin-wide, groundwater levels are generally pretty stable in both the deeper and shallow aquifer systems. There have been historical areas of groundwater level declines in the basin. Those particularly actually in the southern portions of the basin near Roanoke Park, when groundwater use was much higher back in the 80s and 90s. Since that time, Roanoke Park, for example, has utilized a lot more surface water from the Russian River and decreased their groundwater use, and that's caused groundwater levels to recover. And so the trends we see most commonly in the basin these days are stable trends or recovering trends due to the reductions in pumping. Next slide, please. So some of the could be better news is, as I mentioned, the data gaps are something that we're required to assess. And one area where we have a lot of data gaps and lots of uncertainty is related to surface water depletion due to groundwater pumping and potential impacts on riparian vegetation or aquatic species. And so that's an area where we don't see or know of any problems right now. But really the early stages of implementing this plan is going to include the collection of data for us to better assess this particular sustainability indicator. Next slide. And then on the maybe the not so good news is that another tool we have is a groundwater model, and so we've developed that to provide a water budget that I'll show, I think, on the next slide, that has indicated that over time, and particularly during kind of more recent time periods, including the last drought we went through, there's been an increasing decline in the amount of groundwater in storage within the groundwater basin. So that's something to keep an eye on and to further assess. Next slide, please. So this is the other kind of important tool we have that's included in the GSP. This is called a water budget, essentially an accounting of how much water is going into and out of the basin on an annual basis. SGMA requires that we have 3 different time periods: a historical time period for this basin, which goes back to 1976, a more current time period, which is from 2012 to 2018. And then we're also required to project out 50 years. And so we looked at different water demand projections out into the future and simulated additional growth within the basins, as well as a climate change future, and calculated these kind of annual averages for future water budget. You can see the red arrows show the outflows from the basin, and the blue arrows show the inflows from the basin, with some of the larger components there being kind of the direct percolation of precipitation over the basin, surface water and groundwater exchange, the seepage to groundwater and groundwater to discharge to streams, another important component of the water budget. And then inflows from adjoining areas is also another important component. When we look at the difference between the inflows and outflows for that projected water year, we are calculating a change in storage of about 1,400 acre feet per year. And the other thing to note there is one of the biggest source of outflows from the basin is pumping from a combination of agricultural, municipal, and domestic supplies. Next slide. So because we do have the potential for exceedances of some of those thresholds that we've set when we project out those 50 years, we have included some projects and management actions within the plan to either begin implementing or to study into the future. And so there's essentially 2 ways to do that. And it's either reducing demands or increasing supplies. And the plan proposes kind of a combination of those two things, a portfolio of different projects. So those include water use efficiency and alternate water source projects for groundwater users, rural residents, commercial and industrial users, and agriculture, leveraging a lot of the existing programs that have been available to the cities through urban conservation programs, as well as existing best management practices that have helped reduce agricultural use in some areas. So rolling those out to more users in the basin. Next slide. And then on the supply side, a few of the projects that we're looking at are aquifer storage and recovery, otherwise known as groundwater banking. So this would be taking advantage of wintertime water from our Russian River aqueduct. When we have high flows in the river, we can take that water and use our existing infrastructure, our existing aqueduct, and deliver that to wells for injection into the basin, storage for use during times of need. And that's a process that can essentially offset the pumping of native groundwater. And this would be recharge using our treated drinking water. So essentially the same water that that comes out of our taps would be the water that would be used for recharge in that type of project. Another type of project that there's a lot of interest in is stormwater capture and recharge. So this would be, again, taking advantage of high flows when we have days like we had on Sunday and this week, when we can take some of that water, spread it out on the landscape, and allow it to infiltrate. This type of project is something that can really help out with the shallow aquifer system and help out with that stream flow, stream and aquifer connection. Next slide. So with that, I think I'm handing it back to Andy to talk about the fun stuff. I think you're still muted, Andy.
I don't know how many years it's going to take me before I remember that. Thanks. So the groundwater sustainability plan includes a budget for looking ahead for the actions that Marcus just laid out, and as well as staying in compliance with the law. We have to continue to meet and update, and there's a lot of data gaps that need to be filled. So there's a high level budget put in for that represents the first 5 years that we're looking at between 1.1 and 1.2 million in order to stay in compliance and do things that are identified as needing to be done. You can see the filling data gaps is the biggest cost, keeping things going, and monitoring and reporting, and then the update. So these things are at a high level, but they are included in the plan, and you're welcome to take a look at that. Next slide. So we've been very successful, and I'm saying we like I had something to do with it. I didn't. It was before my time, but Sonoma Water and the member agencies submitted a grant application to prepare the groundwater sustainability plan that Marcus just talked about, and was successful. So there's been a couple $1 million that's been gotten so far to not only help prepare the plan, pay for preparing the plan, but also begin some of the implementation work. So we're going to be making sure that we ride on that success, and then aim to get more federal dollars in, so that $1.1 million and the projects associated with them, we're hoping grants are going to be a big part of that picture going forward. But then also there's local, state, other federal partners, our member agencies. And in 2019, we adopted a fee structure. So equitable payment for the users of groundwater in the basin. So we all benefit from, and I have a well in the basin myself. So we all benefit from a healthy groundwater, sustainable groundwater basin. And so we calculated in 2019 how to do that equitably. And we're going to be updating that now that the plan's been developed next year in 2022. Next slide. So for those who were wondering how this is going to relate to yourself, here are some bullets that kind of provides what we believe, how it does affect you, benefit you, how you might be involved, why you might be interested to read this plan. Is, because of the future generations and the sustainability of our basin. So folks have good water, and maintaining the groundwater levels, the availability of that. And one of the really cool things is if you're a rural resident like myself, I'm not hooked up to a water supplier like the city of Cotati or Santa Rosa. Conservation programs haven't been available. But the GSA can be a mechanism to provide those kinds of water conservation rebates and tools that folks that are customers of water suppliers have been able to take advantage of. And so we're looking forward to bringing those to all groundwater users in the basin. Then if you are a farmer or a business, it is possible. The GSA could someday require a meter on those wells. That is not being contemplated at this time, but it is in the authority of the GSA if we thought it was a necessary action. Everybody else, pretty much, a rural resident and a small groundwater user, if you use less than 1,785 gallons a day, which is a lot of water, we have no ability, even if we wanted to, require a meter on those wells. So there's some misinformation out there that that's the plan. It is not the plan. And even if we wanted to, we could. But we are thinking that when the plan is approved by the state, we're going to have a fee that will help cover the costs of keeping the basin sustainable. That might be my last slide. Next slide. Maybe it's on the process. Yes. So as Mr. Scott mentioned, this plan's been developed in many public meetings over 2 years plus. And right now, the complete draft is available for public review. We highly encourage the end of the public review period is the 31st of this month. So I'm really glad we had the opportunity to speak with you still within the comment period. But even after the comment period, we encourage involvement. We're not going away. We're continuing to meet with our advisory committee, our board, and we want to keep updating our plans. So we've had community meetings and we will continue to have community meetings. And even after we submit our groundwater sustainability in January, there's public hearings in December. First of all, the Santa Rosa Plain one is the 9th. So you're welcome to plug into that hearing. And then after it's submitted in early 2022, the Department of Water Resources, which is what DWR is, has a 75-day public review period on top of that. So there's still a lot of time to provide comments and read these things. Next slide. And here's how you find it. So go to our website. The October 14th date's obviously passed. As I mentioned, there's actually going to be a November, is it 8th? No, November 10th Santa Rosa Plain board meeting. You can find that information on our website also. And then the hearing for the groundwater sustainability plan is December 9th. And I think that concludes the information we have, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Thank you, Mr. Scott. I do have a few questions that are coming up here. Councilmember Ford.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation, and I'm very excited to see the plan. One question about the modeling. Well, first of all, I'm wondering, Marcus, if you can explain the difference between the two indicators, the level and the amount of groundwater stored. Aren't those measuring pretty much the same thing?
They are very much measuring pretty much the same thing. And in fact, one of the things that Sigma does allow you to do is use groundwater levels as a proxy for some of those other sustainability indicators. And groundwater storage is one of those other indicators where we are in the plan recommending to use groundwater levels as a proxy for groundwater storage. There are other approaches. The way that other GSAs are doing it is to report the amount of groundwater extraction from their basin to reflect changes in storage. However, we don't have, for many of the groundwater extractions in the basin, we're relying on estimates versus reported usage.
Right. Okay. Thanks. And then a follow-up on that. On the modeling for the groundwater storage, I'm encouraged that your models show that the net decrease is fairly low. Like if we talk about, banking, that would be a pretty small banking project to put that much water back in the ground. So that's encouraging. But at 1,400 acre feet a year out of, it's around 50,000 in and out each year. I'm wondering how confident you are that the balance is really negative. I mean, that seems like a lot of those estimates have got to be pretty, I don't know how you measure stream infiltration into groundwater to that level of precision. So I'm just curious how confident we are that it's actually negative right now.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it certainly is. There is a fair amount of uncertainty with any model, and in particular when you have that many different inputs and outputs that are in some cases, as you mentioned, difficult to measure, such as recharge, that introduces uncertainty. And so that's, I think, one of the main reasons why the way that Sigma was written and the way that GSPs are required to implement Sigma is that the models, the water budget does not actually determine whether or not you're sustainable. So even though we're showing that potential 1,400 acre foot per year storage loss, it's really the future monitoring of all of those indicators, groundwater levels, depletion of surface water, things like that, assessing those with relation to where we've set the different metrics for our thresholds and objectives is how the state is going to judge whether the basin's sustainable or not.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Sparks.
Thank you. I have two, they're probably stupid questions, but I'm going to ask them anyway, just because I'm new to this. The first one is in the regional map, there's an island just west of Cotati that's excluded from the basin. Is that just because the elevation is too high and it's not part of the basin, or why is that excluded?
Yeah, that's a good question and good eyes. Yeah, so that island, there's also one in Petaluma Valley, is essentially an area where bedrock is exposed at the surface, and as Andy mentioned, the state defines basins based on the geology, and so they exclude areas of hard rock, bedrock, or volcanic rocks. So that's why that island is there.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question was about the minimum threshold and measurable objectives for chronic lowering of groundwater levels. The levels that we're looking for are different if the wells are considered stable or wells with historical declines and then recovery. So I'm just wondering about Cotati, like which one of those categories would the wells around here fall into?
Yeah, good question. Because Cotati is pretty close to area where there was historical groundwater level declines back in the 90s. Generally falls under that category of areas where there has been declines followed by stability. And the way that the minimum thresholds are set, which are the levels that we don't want to go below, that could be an indicator that there's what are known as undesirable results. We base those on not going below historical lows to make sure that we stay within those previously above those previous historic lows.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Harvey.
I don't think I will ask poor Marcus any questions. I kind of wanted to thank Andy for herding us along the pathway to getting us here to the plan. We've had some very interesting meetings along the way. He pointed out that we had a community meeting. The last community meeting, there were many over 50 people there. I wrote lots of names. We've gotten lots of input, written input, and which is very, very helpful. And the questions and the thoughtfulness of the folks in the community meeting, I think they're really starting to understand what this is all about, because in the very beginning of this process, it was not very pretty at these community meetings. So it's really good that people are finally understanding. And secondly, I would like to thank Marcus and his counterpart, Jay Jaspers. They are the technical gurus in all of this. And I probably asked for Marcus and Jay at least 1,000 questions. And both of them really have a way of taking what is a really very technical thing. If you actually look at these documents, a lot of them, I've had a couple of phone calls from people. They go, but it's so technical. And yes, it is. But Marcus and Jay have done just really a very good job of kind of walking folks through something that is really technical. And it's meant to be technical because the audience for this plan is the water board. So, you know, that is why it is the way it is, because it needs to be, because it's the water board that actually has to look at this and approve these. But I just would like to pass on all of those thanks. And it's so wonderful that we're getting towards the finish line, or at least the starting line of being able to do the plan. So thank you, Marcus and Andy, again.
Thank you, Councilmember Harvey. I don't see any further questions right now for the existing attendees and or Mr. Scott. So I will open this up for public comment.
Thank you, Mayor Moore. For our attendees tonight, please use your raise hand icon, or if you're dialing in, please use *9. Neil Hancock, go ahead.
Yes, good evening. Thank you very much for a good presentation. And I guess Cotati appears to be somewhat isolated from it. But one of the aspects of groundwater injection, if there's chlorine in the water, doesn't that create a hypochlorous acid, a weak acid? And is there any studies of what that might do? So that's question number one. And if, I mean, maybe not related directly, but if we would like to do more infiltration or encourage people to think about infiltration, is gray water a good way of doing it? One, it could save the town money in terms of returned water that needs to be processed, but also get people thinking about what happens with that gray water. And a third question, maybe again for a Cotati perspective, I noticed in the current storm that my property absorbed at least 4 inches of that rain. So we had 8 inches, and I'm pretty at the back end, we didn't output any water. So I'm just wondering, we're coming up to think about Helen Putnam Park redesign, and could that be a place where for large storms there might be some infiltration? So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock.
Jenny Blaker, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to ask 2 very stupid questions. That was a great presentation. Thank you. But I wondered if you could clarify a couple of things. There was a mention on one slide of alternative sources of water, I think. And I was thinking, well, there's surface water in the creeks, there's groundwater underground. What other alternative is there? And were you thinking of something like rainwater catchment? Or I didn't follow what alternative sources would mean. And the other thing is there was a reference to rural users using up to 1,785 gallons a day, which seems huge. I thought we were supposed to be aiming for 55 gallons a day per person. So I wondered if you could explain that figure. Thanks again.
Thank you, Ms. Blaker.
Mayor Moore, that will end public comment.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if Mr. Trotter would like to handle those questions.
Sure, I can take a shot. So starting with Mr. Hancock's first question on aquifer storage and recovery and water quality. And so, yeah, that is something. Any residual chlorine within the source water that's being injected into the wells, there's a potential for that to react with organic carbon that's in the aquifer and form disinfection byproducts, which also occur within the drinking water. The state regional water quality control board is responsible for permitting aquifer storage and recovery projects. And that's one of the things that's included in monitoring programs associated with those types of projects. And we actually did a pilot study in the city of Sonoma, utilizing treated water from the aqueduct. And we did see some low levels of those constituents that are in the treated drinking water. However, they all remain below the regulatory thresholds. But it is something that would be closely monitored associated with those projects, and it is something that the other regulatory agencies are have their eyes on and are responsible for requiring. On the infiltration, and so gray water, it would be considered like one of those alternate water sources, to get at Ms. Blaker's first question there. Gray water is something that could be included to offset the use of potable water, or some in groundwater in those cases of rural residential. And then I'll just also finish up on the alternate water sources question. So other types of alternate water sources would include rainwater harvesting, recycled water, things like that. And then the potential for redesign of parks and such are types of projects that would fall under that, potentially that stormwater capture and recharge aspect. Any kind of low impact development or project that slows, spreads, and sinks water into the ground to reduce, potentially reduce flooding and increase infiltration are the types of projects that the plan would be, supporting and potentially helping promote. And then lastly, Ms. Baker's question on the rural residential, the 1,785 gallons per day. That's not an estimate of what rural residential users are using in this basin. That number comes from the state, and it's how they define a de minimis groundwater user in the SGMA regulations as anyone that's using less than that amount of water, essentially 2 acre-feet per year for just domestic purposes, non-commercial purposes, are considered de minimis users and are exempt from certain requirements of SGMA, primarily they can't have meters imposed upon them. So that's where that number comes from.
Thank you so much, Mr. Trotter. With that, I will bring it back to the council as we're looking for feedback and direction. I think this would be something in the subject matter expert of Councilmember Harvey.
Well, it didn't sound like anyone had any real concerns with anything, and it sounds like even the public comments, those questions were answered. So really looking to see if there's anything out there that people were concerned about, because this is important and we've been working on it for a little bit, and we just wanted to be sure that the council and the public in our community had the opportunity to weigh in if they had any striking concerns. So it's just another set of public outreach.
Thank you so much. So with that, I don't know that we need a motion on this or anything, but I certainly appreciate all the work put into this with Councilmember Harvey, with Mr. Rogers and Mr. Trotter, and again, Mr. Scott on the technical portion of that. Thank you all so much and appreciate it. So with that, we will move on to our next agenda item, which is the 10B license agreements to operate the Veranda Folletti Ranch.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So I'll just give a quick overview. I won't go into some of the background that's in the staff report, because I think we all are familiar with that. But most recently, on August 24th, we had a conversation about the farm work plan that was presented by Sandy Loam and Farmster. And at that meeting, the next step in the license renewal was to come back and actually renew the license agreements. And so that's what this is about tonight. So in the packet, there's 2 5-year licenses, and one is to Farmster, and the other is to Cotati or Sandy Loam. And the basic outline of the license agreements is that they are license agreements as opposed to like a leased kind of structure. So they are a license, and the license covers access over the entire property, but then the licensed premises is defined in the attached map. And the purpose of this is to ensure that there's legal mutual access for both parties on the property. The license fee is $1 per year, consistent with other city licenses such as this. Both license agreements are, by the way, they're essentially mirror images of each other. So they're very consistent, except for there's an exhibit C, that has some specific provisions for each licensee, but otherwise they're essentially identical. It does require appointment of a property manager for each one of the licensees, and the licensees do become responsible for basically normal maintenance and minor repairs. The city would retain responsibility for any larger repairs. $5,000 is the threshold that's used in the agreements. And maintenance items over $2,000. There is an allowance for occasional, actually 4 times per year, exceedances of the maintenance, and that would be maybe like spring, landscape things that might just be more expensive. So there's that occasional thing, but it requires city authorization. The city would fund programs supported in the farm work plan, and these are all things that would provide community benefit and are intended to act as supplemental programs for other things already going on in the community, other preschool programs, other public school programs, things like that. There's a table in the staff report that has some examples of the types of programs that we'd be looking at. And the normal insurance and indemnity provisions, and then there's a 30-day termination ability, or immediate for life and safety issues. And I think the most immediate thing that's going to happen if the council approves the license agreements tonight is some preschool, farm, and garden field trips. So there's a chicken keepers club for pre-K kids with the other preschools that Cotati has been working with to have them visit the property, basically like a field trip, and do chicken activities on the property. And so that would be probably the first thing that we would see in November, and then the rest of the programs will start building from there. And the intent is that each February, so it's intended to coincide with strategic planning, but actually before that, they would provide an updated work plan for the coming fiscal year. And then at a staff level, we'd work through that. And then during strategic planning and budget processes, we would have those conversations about what that upcoming work plan would look like. So that is a general outline. The license activities were already budgeted. We did talk about it in general terms during strategic planning and budget this year. So that's already budgeted for, so there's no additional appropriations required. I will also, before I close the presentation, just let everyone know that Aishwarya with Sandy Loam, or also Cotati is how they're licensed, is here tonight, as well as Jeff Kelly and Dustin DiMatteo for Farmster. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Abid. Councilmember Ford.
Just one quick question about, I'm not sure I understand what it means to appoint 2 different parties as the property manager for the property, especially when it comes to something like scheduling events. And so I'm wondering if the city has thought through what that looks like. I mean, I'm assuming these two parties work well together and there's not an issue, but it seems like kind of a funny structure to write a license in which each one is separately identified as the property manager.
Yeah, it's the, I understand it. So what we were trying to accomplish is that both licensed parties would have access to the entire property, but they'd have a primary licensed premises that they're in charge of. And then separate from the city license agreements, there's also, we use different names for it, but they're working on a third-party cooperative access agreement where they work out the terms of their mutual access in their different licensed areas. And then the work plan itself is intended to be, so all that is intended to create the ability to provide shared access and work together from an access and, from an access perspective and how the programs work. But then the work plans itself are, the way the license agreements frame them is that they're a cooperative work plan. So that when the work plans get submitted, there's already been pre-work done where they coordinate all those. So like, for example, in this question, you ask about events, like how would that event work? And how does that overlap between the two licensed parties? There could very well be events that are entirely on one licensed area or the other, but may require access for one or the other just to get to the event. But all that is intended to be taken care of with the licenses, the cooperative access agreement, and then the coordinated work plans.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up from the council at this point. I kind of had a question along the same lines as Ben when I looked at the appointment of a property manager. In the event that one of the parties were to default, would the other party be the primary property manager responsible?
Yeah, so if one of the parties defaults, then the way it works is that the other party would have sort of first right to discuss with the city the other licensed area. The city would still have to consent to it, but they basically have the first right to that other licensed area in that case.
I don't see any further questions from the council. I don't know if we wanted to have any comment from Ashwara or from Dustin.
I'll just chime in. Dustin DiMatteo here from Farmster. Just very grateful for all the time and effort put in by city staff and patience by council community. We very much look forward to opening up the gates. And thank you, Damien, for alluding to some of the upcoming events through Alma Matate and Sandy Loam. So that's all, and looking forward to getting into business for another 5 years. The first 3 have been quite the blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin. Okay. With that, I will open up for public comment.
Thank you, Mayor Moore. Looking to our attendees tonight, please use your raise hand icon if you'd like to make a public comment. And if you're dialing in, use *9. Mayor Moore, that will end public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Burgess. With that, I would bring it back to the council and would entertain a motion on this if there's no further questions or discussion.
All right, I would move that the city council authorize the city manager by motion to execute license agreements with Farmster and Amamatate to operate the Veranda Faletti Ranch, subject to the final review and approval by the city attorney, including funding community programs up to the authorized budget amount.
Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Mr. Mayor, yes. I had a comment actually. Could I?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to our licensees, and I mentioned this to Dustin in our education committee meeting. But I wanted to reiterate, I'm really hoping that when we see that work plan in February, that we can see some opportunities for partnership with the Cotati Rohnert Park Unified School District for some official field trips and things like that with the public schools, just to make sure that there are some opportunities for low-income kids to be able to get involved at the ranch. All right, thank you. And with that, I will also second the motion that we approve.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Burgess, would you give us a roll call, please?
Councilmember Harvey.
Yes.
Councilmember Sparks.
Yes.
Councilmember Ford.
Yes.
Mayor Moore.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Damien, for that. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Ishwara. I look forward to that program being up and running, and that will be just a gem and an asset for the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll move on to our next agenda item.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I'm sorry, could I request a brief 3-minute break?
Absolutely. It is 7:43. Let's come back at 7:48. How about a 5 minute?
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we have almost everyone back. So we're reconvening from recess at 7:48 p.m. Now we will move on to our regular agenda item 10C, discussion regarding the pension unfunded accrued liability management policy, an update on the status of the UAL refunding project. And with that, I will turn it over to our Director of Administrative Services, Ms. Angela Porter, if she's available.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, fellow staff in our community. Give me a moment. I'm going to try and find my camera so that I can turn that on. There we go. Thank you for bearing with me. Taking control over the presentation covered up my other skills within Zoom. So this evening, we're bringing to you the staff's recommendation for establishing a 115 trust for the pension rate stabilization funds, along with the updated unfunded accrued liability policy and an update on the pension refunding progress and where we are right now and looking forward. So I wanted to step back again to where we were, what this 115 trust is, and how it can help the city of Cotati. So as a quick refresher on what it is and how it can assist us, the 115 trusts were approved for pension pre-funding by the IRS. These trusts are permitted to invest in monies in higher yielding instruments than the city can currently put our investments into. However, these funds, including interest earnings, can only be used to pay for those pensions. Pension costs are derived from many criteria, not just the rate of returns from CalPERS. So investing some funding outside of the pension allows for a better diversification of those funds. Just taking a quick step back before jumping into the slide, our pension policy, when we reviewed it, taking all the considerations and comments back from council, a big component is the pension rate stabilization fund that was included within the policy. So we wanted to make sure when we brought back this policy, we were also bringing back the feedback from our evaluations of the pension rate stabilization funds. Within the policy, there is guidance where we can use either or a self-managed trust or a provider-managed trust. And so we wanted to provide a quick summary of what goes into if we choose to decide the self-managed trust. And that means that we would have to use legal guidance in order to establish a trust for these funds. This cost could be anywhere in excess of $25,000, the best estimate of what these fees are going for in order to get that type of ruling and the appropriate setup of these trusts. We still then would also have to have an investment broker or a firm we would go to make sure that we are investing these funds in an appropriate manner, that they are segregated from our other funds, and appropriately reported and managed accordingly. So alternatively, we can use a provider managed trust fund where they have template trust packages that they've established. They have them written up for the guidance provided by the IRS and or other established trusts that they have, and they're waiting for IRS approval on them. And they can, that IRS private letter ruling, I did want to let you know, one of our providers that we evaluated, they do have that letter of ruling for the 115 trust. but it is for the one that they were able to take to the IRS and get that ruling on. We would have to individually also go and get that ruling in our name in order to have that protection. But considering the trust that they've established already has that ruling, and if it is established in the same manner and is managed in the same manner, then it would follow that this should be protected under the same IRS ruling. And then, of course, the provider managed, we still have the ongoing fees that come in with that provider, because not only are they providing the investments and the management of the investments, they're also providing the administration of the trust and the reporting that goes with that. So with that, we really, as staff, feel like a managed plan was the best option. And so we did evaluate both the CalPERS SEPT program as well as the PARS program. And comparing them side by side, with the CalPERS, there's a set of, this is the California Employees Pension Pre-Funding Trust. That's what the SEPT stands for. And the Public Agency Retirement Services is what PARS is. So in comparing the two agencies, the significant differences of note are really the history in the pension pre-funding program. CalPERS has just over 1 year of in this 115 trust for pensions, compared to PARS, which has over 10 years of experience. CalPERS focused on their trust for the other post-employment benefits offerings before they offered the 115 trust for pensions, because they already have a pension. They are the pension plan, and so they felt it was not an area they wanted to move into at first. But then, as demand was pushed by different cities and agencies for them to also not just provide the other post-employment benefit trust, but to also offer a balanced and better 115 trust for pensions, this is something that they've moved into in the last, like I said, year. CalPERS only offers 2 different types of investment strategies, which are rather conservative, compared to PARS, which offers 5 different strategies, which can be either actively managed or passively managed. And then they could also provide to us or create our own type of investment strategy. If we want to make a very specific Cotati strategy, they could develop that type of strategy for us as well. PARS offers a portfolio manager who provides investment assistance. So this is direct investments expertise that you can draw on, and they provide you guidance on those strategies within the strategies, as well as other investments around the pension program, versus CalPERS, which offers more of a plan management view and general assistance with your plan. They can also help coordinate with our actuaries at CalPERS to make sure we are establishing appropriate plans and coordinating the 115 trust management with our actual pension unfunded liability management, setting up a plan for both of those together. So I know there was a lot of detail within the packet. And so what we felt was a good way to present this as fair and unbiased as possible was to provide you a summary of the 10 years of fees and estimated interest earnings for each one of these plans based on what they say their expected rate of return is and what their targets are, as well as then offset by their set fees. With CalPERS, there is a set 25 basis points, which includes all of the administrative and investment fees. So this is flat. This is what's applied to the total investments plus interest earnings. Versus PARS, which has a layered fees, which approximate anywhere from 68 basis points to 110 basis points, where 60 basis points is directed strictly to those administration fees for trust and investment management, and the remainder is for investment fees for the specific funds. So we calculated and presented here in the calculation of the fees compared to those estimated returns based on the target returns stated by each one of these providers. With both of these assumptions, we used a $2 million initial investment starting January 1 of next year. And this is their average rate of return. We did not take into consideration any peaks and valleys. Investments aren't necessarily flat. They change over time. But in order to build an estimate that was equitable between the different programs, we wanted to assume an average return, what it would look like comparatively. So this is really where the fees sit based comparatively over the different plans provided by CalPERS and PARS. But in comparing the rates of return, staff had a lot of additional analysis that we performed to really compare the plans and make sure that we're correctly reflecting what potential earnings losses there could be. We focused on the balance of risk and returns compared to those fees. And we found out that really the CalPERS SEPT1 plan and those plan assets, even though they've only been in this activity for over a year, it really matches their SERPT or their OPEB plan that they've had now for 10 years. So in taking that into consideration, the interest earnings that they are getting on their returns are more in line with where we see the PARS moderate. So we took this to as a looking glass. Okay, if we wanted to really compare apples to apples and what the CalPERS program returns would have been over the last 10 years, they have an existing portfolio that is similar to what they're offering in the SEPT1 plan. And this is their actual returns that they've had over the last 10 years. In here in this slide, I do want to apologize. This says 5 years. And so we were initially comparing 5 years, but on packet day, we got the updated schedule from CalPERS that had the 10 years. So we did update the rest of the schedules where it had their average return for 10 years. And so that did reflect their reduction to the 8.2% instead of the 8.9% for that CalPERS SERPT 2 plan. So in summary of this analysis here, using the same assumptions that we invest the $2 million first thing next year, and that the investments earn the average return in the next 10 years as they did in the last 10 years, and we apply the same fees to those interest earnings, the set return is revised to that 8.2% from the plan's goal of 5%. And again, this is based on that assumption that the CalPERS over the last 10 years with a similar plan, this is what they are earning so that we can compare it to what the PARS program is currently earning. That's where we can really see that in order to meet those same returns, those fees that are being assessed by PARS quickly start eating into those investment returns because of the high cost. So even though it's earning 0.2% more in interest earnings over the life of those 10 years on average, it is quickly taking away some of those funds. So we would have to be in a much more aggressive program in the PARS program, which is called the balanced, than the current CalPERS program. So the most left-hand side, the SEPT1, is more corollary in their asset balance as the second column in the PARS program, which is their moderate program. So there was a significant amount of data that is included in the packet. And so I do want to point out just that there is detailed analysis of each one of these pieces that was provided in packet pages 120 to 122. The CalPERS SEPT program presentation that was provided to staff and gone through in detail is in pages 123 to 142. That SERPT program strategy 2 portfolio as a comparative basis for that SEPT is at packet pages 143 and 144. And then the following quickly up by the PARS presentation that was provided to staff at 145 to 183, and as well as their Highmark portfolio, who manages their investments and would be our investment manager if we so choose them, is at pages 184 to 193. So based on all the analysis performed and the outreach and interviews and consultations we had with other cities that use these programs, we are recommending that we establish the 115 trust using the CalPERS SEP Strategy 1. And additionally tonight, we're recommending that council adopt the pension unfunded accrued liability management policy, thus dictating the usage and management of this pension rate stabilization trust fund. And this policy includes all the comments provided by council, as well as a few clarifying descriptions, because we wanted to make sure it was detailed enough, explanatory to serve its purpose in perpetuity for anyone who comes after us to make sure it's managed properly. Finally, this is just one part of our ongoing project around pension management. Currently, we have proposals out for private placement of the bonds. Upon review of our strategy and timing of issuance, it was determined to avoid any additional delays and to really provide council the analysis and the interest rate cost for these bonds. The most appropriate way was to go out for an immediate bid for those bonds for private placement in order to know what the interest rates banks were offering currently. And so I do have to apologize. We will be coming back to council on November 9th, and that's when we will present that differential of what we're seeing out in the public offerings for interest rates for these bonds versus what we are actually receiving back on private placement for our said bonds. And that's with council approval, we will move forward with either strategy, meaning that on the November 23rd meeting or the following December meeting, we would be moving forward with adopting a private placement if it came in at a decent rate at terms that council was amenable to. And then if we decide to move to a public offering, then that would move forward with receiving our credit rating and eventual bond closing no earlier than mid-January. That ends my presentation. I'm sure there's lots of questions. I'd love to provide any answers.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. I will bring it back to the council for questions. Councilmember Ford.
Thank you, Mayor Moore, and thank you, Angela, for the great presentation. And my only question is one on the policy. I was going through it again just before the meeting, and I just have one question in the sort of the mechanics of funding the stabilization fund. So there's this process where we calculate sequestered savings when we choose to fund. You know, let's say we pay down we borrow money to pay down our obligations. Then we calculate basically how much money that's going to save us, and we say we'll send half of that money into the stabilization fund, right? Until the stabilization, or unless the stabilization fund is above, brings our total funding to over 110%. So if we're in that state, say there's a really good return year and all of a sudden our funding bumps above 110%, then I'm trying to figure out what happens to that money then. Currently it says, and thereafter all sequestered savings will be directed to a pension obligation bond call fund, so two questions. First is, can you explain what that pension obligation bond call fund is? And second, as I read it, it's half of the savings go into the stabilization fund until doesn't need any more money. And then all of the sequestered savings from then on have to go into the bond call fund. So it feels like half the savings is available for general fund purposes up until we've superfunded, and then we remove the flexibility to spend half of that money on other. Is that what's intended, that all of the sequestered savings then go into the bond call fund as opposed to half?
I'll just jump in right now. So the sequestered savings is, per my understanding, this probably might be some clarification we can make sure that's so sequestered savings by definition is the half. That is what's being sequestered. That's not what it's saying. So I need to make sure that that's what it's saying. So sequestered savings are half of the savings. Because and then, so if we do get to an overfunded state of over 10% or at the 110%, then instead of going to the pension rate stabilization fund, it would go to the bond call fund for pay down on the bonds. So that is a clarifying item that.
I think it's easy to fix the last line of page 5 of the policy, just needs the word annual inserted before sequestered savings, because total sequestered savings is all of it. Annual sequestered savings is where the 50% is inserted in the definition. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Harvey.
Thank you. And I would like to thank Angela. She spent some time with me today as I had some issues with some of the numbers, and thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I do have a question on the policy. And I'm so glad we have a policy here, because others, years from now will wonder what we're doing or what we were thinking. So it's always good to leave that as history. But on the review of policy, it says city staff will review policy for implementation of best practices and will provide the council for adoption on an as needed basis. That sort of leaves it open-ended, and it feels like the review should be at some periodic, I don't know what the number, a best practice, every 2 years, every 3 years, some number of years, I think, because what happens with some policies is they get out of date, and if we put as needed, I worry that they won't get reviewed often enough.
Councilmember Harvey, I'll just start with saying I think the general intent, and Angela can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the general intent was that assuming that we're implementing the policy because we go forward with some refinancing of the pension debt, we would be using this policy each year as part of the budget process. And I think the general intent, at least as I understood it, was that as we use it each year, provided it still functions as intended, it would probably not need revision. But if we run into unanticipated issues or questions or something becomes not clear in the future, then that would be sort of the trigger to bring it forward for a discussion with council, from the staff perspective, at least. Obviously, the council could always bring it back any point as well if they request it. But I think that was generally how it was intended to function. Notwithstanding your comment that I understand that you're saying that you think it would be better to have it on some sort of periodic reoccurring basis that's written in the policy, right?
Because it sounds like what you're saying is we would only really review it and update it if it caused us an issue. As going through the annual process, if there was an issue, then we'd have to revise it. But it seems like it should be good practice to periodically, like we do other policies, to periodically review them. And the review may be that it's fine, but it just as needed. That could be someone could say, oh well. Like we've seen on some things, this hasn't been updated in 10 years. Well, it probably should have been reviewed. And
yeah, I would say too that we have a whole suite of various investment policies for not investment, financial policies.
Right.
And I would probably put this in that general category of policies. If we were going to look at financial policies, we probably should look at them at the same time.
Perfect.
The whole package.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would be okay with that.
Yeah.
What struck me was the as needed. Typically what that means is never, unless, like you said, there's a problem. And
Right.
that's what struck me.
If I can jump in just quickly, we also didn't want it to be something that was haphazardly changed. There's been a lot of due diligence putting in what we believe is best for what the funding strategy is currently. Not that that can't change, but that as Ben brought up, how sequestered savings is defined as half, or other council directions. So it is pretty thorough and methodical. And so, as Damien said, bringing that back as we put it into practice every year, we will find things, as we do with all policies, and we'll bring those back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sparks.
Thank you. I appreciate the report. Thank you so much. I think it was really clever to look at the return rates for the existing CalPERS plan and kind of peg that to the comparable PARS one. So thank you for that. I just had a quick question about the something we talked about last time this came up, which was the 90% funding level. And we had a concern that if we funded at 90% initially, that would put us really close to or even into a super funded status right away. And I'm wondering, with the way it's worded now, that at no point will it drop below 80%. Is the thinking that with this initial refunding, we could do it at lower than 90%, just kind of target us not going right up to 100%? And sort of what level are we thinking about refunding initially? And how does that line up with this policy? So I just wanted some clarification on that.
Angela, you want to take it? Or?
I was waiting for you to jump in. I didn't want to step on your toes.
Oh, yeah, no, likewise. Anyway, I'll just say real briefly, so the last time we did discuss this policy, we did have a conversation and making sure the policy was flexible enough to anticipate future returns, not just what was in front of us at that moment, even though we knew, like in the example we're actually in right now, where we have a really high return year, but we haven't gotten that actuarial analysis yet. So, we don't want a policy that's going to cause us to overshoot when we know we don't need to. So that is the funding level that we've been talking about, is not funding at 90%, knowing that we have a big, a relatively substantial increase in our funded level from the returns when that actuarial report hits next year. So, Councilmember Sparks, to your point, that is what we're looking at. We're looking at hitting, and I don't know the exact percent, but it's 80-something%, I think, in terms of what we'd be refunding. And then as soon as we get the actuarial report next year, we'd be right up to 90% or a little bit more.
Okay.
That's the intent, yeah.
So in this policy with the 80% sort of floor allows that, so we'd be all good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then the only question I had, based on all the information in here, PERS is not a government agency, is it? I couldn't find anything on there, and then I thought, well, that explains the fees associated with that and why those fees are significantly higher than the helpers program.
PARS, right? Yeah, the PARS program. Yeah, it's basically a privately managed trust fund.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much on that. Okay, if we don't have any further questions right now, I will open this up for public comment.
Looking to our attendees tonight, please use your raise hand icon or dial *9 if you'd like to make a public comment. Mayor Moore, that will end public comment.
Thank you. It's probably just too many numbers for people, and they're like, what? I don't have any further questions. I like the concept and the way that you've explained it very much, Angela and Damien. And I think it's something that's going to help the community in the long term. Councilmember Ford.
Yeah, thanks. To address that question about the mechanics of funding once the pension rate stabilization fund is above the 110% level, I'd suggest that at the bottom of page 5 right now, it says, thereafter, all sequestered savings will be directed into a pension obligation bond call fund. That change to thereafter, annual sequestered savings will be directed into a pension obligation bond call fund. I think that's what was intended given the definition just below. Does that meet your understanding, Angela?
I agree. Yes, it should say annual. I agree.
Okay. And then the other pedantic thing I want to bring up is in section 4A, funding level objective on page 3. Currently reads, in defining the funded ratio, it says, it's the parenthetical comment, being the ratio by which the market value of assets exceeds the present value of projected benefits. If my price exceeds your price by 50%, that means mine is higher than yours. And that's not what we mean here. I think that should just say being the ratio of the market value of assets to the present value of projected benefits. If that makes sense. So an 80% funded ratio means our funding with CalPERS is 80% of our future obligations, not 180%.
Thank you. So with that, I would entertain a motion with the amendments as supplied by Councilmember Ford.
I would be happy to move that the City Council adopt the resolutions, 1, approving the adoption of the California Employers Pension Pre-Funding Trust Fund, CEPPT, administered by California Public Employees Retirement System, aka CalPERS, and 2, adopting the Pension Unfunded Accrued Liability Management Plan. Wow. With the amendments that were suggested by Councilmember Ford.
Second that motion. Oh.
So we have a motion. We have a motion and a second. Councilmember Sparks, I think I heard you just a hair quicker than Councilmember Ford.
Yes. Councilmember Ford got the amendments, so there you go.
Right.
So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Burgess, if you would give us a roll call, please.
Councilmember Harvey.
Yes.
Councilmember Sparks.
Yes.
Councilmember Ford.
Yes.
Mayor Moore.
Yes, thank you very much. Nice job on that. I'm looking forward to that. And I think it is smart to allow them to manage the funds because we have enough on our plate. Thank you so much. Now we will move on to agenda item 10D, review of existing city manager and community development department commitments and priorities. Mr. Obed, will you be addressing this?
Yes, yeah, Mayor. So I'll start it off and I'll hand it off to Noah at the end in case there's anything I missed in my overview. So, I mean, everyone I think is well aware of how we do our priority settings. So we do strategic planning and then that eventually gets incorporated into a budget, which is adopted by the council by June 30th of each year. And it's inevitable every year, you know, things come up that are unanticipated or perhaps the, both in terms of new projects, but also in terms of even anticipated projects sometimes can end up being less work than was anticipated or potentially even more work than what was anticipated. And we do have, I think we have both of those examples in this list. So most of the projects that that came up either related to existing work plan projects or totally different projects through the year so far are primarily community development related. So in other words, when they came from council, they either got assigned to community development as the lead or they, in some cases, they got assigned to the city manager's office as the lead for that project, just really based on the type of request it was. So community development, I'll just start there, and I'll just I won't go into too much depth from what's already in the staff report, but we do have the community development department. That's the planning department as well as the building department. It's 3.5 people is what runs that the full staffing for that department. And we also do have a contract code enforcement officer and a contract building official. So those are sort of supplemental plus contractors that we hire for some other sort of ancillary work from time to time. For building permits, it's actually interesting. Even in spite of COVID, 2020 was still a pretty significant year. We had 338 building permits issued with a over $16 million construction value. And in 2021, so far, we're already at 291 permits through September with over $23 million construction value. So there's a lot of building permit activity going on. Business licenses, community development is involved in business licenses. So every time a new business opens up in Cotati, they do a zoning review just to basically make sure that that business type can operate in that zone. Code enforcement. So there is a part-time code enforcement officer that's funded directly from the community development budget. Currently, we have 75, well, since January, I should say, January 2020, the city initiated 75 code enforcement investigations. 59 were resolved and 34 remain open. And the reason why the math doesn't work is because there was 18 carryover cases from before January 2022 or 2020. And code enforcement, each can be kind of a case on its own. Sometimes they're simple, sometimes it's a lot of effort. And even though we do have a contract code enforcement officer, community development is heavily involved in just overseeing that work and making sure everything stays on track there. Customer service is another major focus for community development. And this isn't community development, this is really citywide. We've, in the last many years, we've been very focused on providing the best and most prompt, thorough customer service we can. Cotati, I mean, some of you maybe know this, some of you maybe don't, but historically Cotati had kind of a bad reputation, especially in the development community in terms of responsiveness and consistency of answers and things like that. So it takes a long time to undo that reputation. So it's been a focus for many years now to really be very dedicated to that, but it does take a significant amount of time. It could be as simple as just answering residents' phone calls for simple questions to more complicated, code zoning development type questions. Community development does take the lead on planning applications. So anytime any project comes in that requires planning approvals, then they're the lead, at least to start, to get it through entitlements. And then this is one of those areas where you never really know any given year, kind of what you're going to be dealing with. Sometimes you don't have a lot of big projects. Other times big projects just come in through the door. And so it's hard to totally staff and anticipate those kind of things. But we try to handle it both with our own staffing and for peaks. We try to use contractors and, to the extent we can to help with those processing so we can promptly turn those around and also turn them around within the requirements under state law. Currently, in 2020, just to give you a sense, in 2020, the planning division reviewed and processed 22 current development applications, and 17 have been reviewed or initiated so far in 2021. And then land use and environmental policy changes. So that's mostly what we're talking about. I mean, aside from the occasional development project that comes through, mostly these are the kind of requests that come from the community or come from the council. So these are like, hey, the general plan has an implementing action and we, this is a priority to us. We want to get this done sooner rather than later. Or maybe the housing element within the general plan has action like that. Or maybe it's just something unrelated or not directly related to the general plan or, the housing element part of it. But other things like greenhouse gas reductions and gas station bans, things like that we've also talked about. And then they also, of course, do other policy initiatives such as updating our CEQA thresholds for vehicle miles traveled and the bike and ped master plan, general plan element updates like the housing element and so forth. And on packet page 224, there's a list of projects, and these are not development projects. These are sort of like zoning planning projects. And that first table is a list of the projects that we had talked about during the budget creation and strategic planning. And so that includes things such as like the housing element update, the housing finance model, the opportunity site selection for the housing element, the administration functions, multifamily streamlining, canvas ordinance review and update, the GHG reduction strategy. That's an example of a placeholder where we knew we'd be doing some greenhouse gas reduction work, but we didn't know the exact scope. That scope is significantly bigger than we anticipated back then, but this, that's kind of normal for what can happen through the year. And as well as economic development 2.0, sort of a blanket project for a bunch of miscellaneous things that we'd identified, and then the bike and ped master plan update. And in that table, it talks about, where they are, kind of where, if they started or not started, what the relative priority is, at least from a staff perspective. And then the internal target completion date. So these are generally, except for the housing element, which is a multi-year, and the bike and ped master plan, which is a multi-year project. The rest of them are intended to be finished in this fiscal year. Some added projects, which is the next table down on packet page 224, are things like the objective design standards, the train depot lot property sale that just sort of popped up. I mean, we knew it could come up, but it's one of those things where the timing is hard to estimate. Rezoning Fleddy Ranch, and sort of by extension, this agricultural zoning amendment, which was brought up earlier in this meeting. And then the GHG reduction strategy, even though it was in the work plan, it kind of expanded into what we now know it to be, which is reach codes, in addition to PV and storage, EV connections, 100% clean power, and then also new gas station or gas station expansion prohibitions. So that's where that project sits right now. And then the work, we also this came up, and it wasn't anticipated at the time, but a workforce housing financing GAPA. So we've been working with Burbank Housing and some other cities, a couple of other cities in the county, to try to get that in place, or at least get a good model in place that we can then bring to the council and have a conversation about. But essentially, it's just a more streamlined way to finance housing than the current sort of Jenga tower of financing that we do today, that not we, but everyone in California, probably everywhere in the country does today. And it's just really not a way to get things done if that's your goal, And then wayfinding panels, and then the VERNIF, it broke out of the objective design standards, and it's going to Planning Commission on November 1st. So it broke off and became its own project, and it's moving forward now. And then just the other thing I'll just touch on real quick is there was some other, even though it's not listed in the table here, but some other things that were requested, such as the noise ordinance, green procurement, which is going to get wrapped into the SB 1383 work, and also something has come up around the park ordinances and the dog leash laws that we're also looking at. So those are basically in the city manager's department as leads, but those are some other projects that are out there that we're working on. Finishing the Rhonda Fleddy Ranch license agreements, that was a significant thing, as well as the SAFE thing, which also completed today, is a significant thing out of the manager's office that I think we're able to now focus on some of the other ordinances and get these things going, at least in the manager's department. And then finally, I will just say back on, and this is on packet page 228, is the full list of all the projects that we talked about, both things that were originally part of the budgeting and strategic planning process, and then some new things that have come up. And they have target completion dates on there. And there's just a suggestion there, if the council is inclined or would like to move up in time or move up the timing of the Floody Ranch and agricultural zoning amendment work and the new gas station prohibition. It shows basically those two moving up, and then the housing opportunity site selection, we can shift that more to the consultant to work on to free up some staff time. And then the housing administration function, we do have a pretty good idea of how we manage the for sale housing, but the rental is still kind of up in the air, how we manage the rental stock to make sure that it transacts and doesn't get lost and stays affordable. And we have quite a few. I think Noah's been working on quite a few different options and threads there, but the timing of that is uncertain. So so the suggestion is that we would continue to work on it, but we would focus more on the zoning and the gas station prohibition. And one thing I will add about the gas station prohibition is we were anticipating our CPA to be taking sort of a countywide lead on it, but it seems like how it's developing is that they're going to be just sort of a coordinating role where they're going to host meetings for everyone to talk about what they're doing. But it looks like each jurisdiction is going to kind of go on their own to get the gas station prohibitions in place. And I also suggest there that if we're going to work on that, we should also, in parallel, but one's not related, one's not necessarily related to the other, but in parallel, I would also suggest that we also, if we move that ordinance forward, that we also move forward a letter or some outreach to the county to also encourage them to adopt something similar, because you definitely don't want to prohibit gas station expansions or ban them within Cotati, and then the county still allows them, and then you have a ring of gas stations around your city, So they're related in that sense, but they're not necessarily, they don't need to slow down our work for our local ordinance. So anyway, just two suggestions there based on some comments I've heard previously from the council, just for conversation. And that's it for me, but Noah, I'll just pass it to you in case I forgot anything that you want to mention that's important to bring up.
Thank you, Damian. No, I think you did a great job summarizing. I would just say to the council, it was important for me so you all kind of understand kind of some of the day-to-day things that folks may not be aware of, that we do in the department, and what resources we have to be able to accomplish those. And then just be able to see how, although we set our priorities at the beginning of the year, things bubble up, whether it's community related or like the objective design standards, I think are a great example of, some state changes in the law that then we needed to respond to, so we weren't caught flat-footed by an SB 35 project that came in and we had nothing in place to be able to respond to it. And so that's how some of those things kind of rise to the higher up in the priorities. That being said, I do think we were able to take a sharp look at it, work with Damian, and see where we could try to respond and shuffle some of our priorities to what we think the council's interested in having us tackle to respond to some of the needs of the community. And if the council chooses to kind of make the changes there that are highlighted on packet page 228, we'll get going on them right away. And I think we'll be able to get them accomplished, or definitely at least be pretty far along in the process in keeping with that schedule. So that's it. And I'm happy to answer any questions as you all review the information, but that's what the intent was to provide this.
Thank you, Damian. Thank you, Noah. I'll bring it back to the council for any questions, comments. Councilmember Sparks.
Thank you. I just want to say I really, really appreciate all the thought that's gone into this. And so important to me that you feel like you're set up for success and we're not asking you to shuffle things around so much that you're not able to follow through on your projects that you're working on. So just thank you for this really detailed report. And I did have a couple questions. One was, mainly I just have one question, which is the opportunity site selection for the housing element. I'm wondering what your feeling is about shuffling more of that off to the contractor. Do we feel comfortable with that? Like, I assume we do, or it wouldn't be recommended, but I guess I just want to hear a little bit more about that. Is there anything that's lost by us reducing our participation in that part of the process, and what's the trade-off?
So no, I actually think it's a better way to go. There was just so much change going on into the law regarding what and how we make those choices that I was frankly getting really nervous about it. And so I prioritized it early in the process to get some time spent on it, especially while we had, Joel Galbraith, senior planner who presented the design guidelines and did those for us. He agreed to work with us for a year. He's a retired guy and just came in and basically did us a favor and agreed to work for us part-time for a year. And so early in his time, I asked him to spend some time on that so we could get a jump on it. And then we had some development projects come in, and as I kind of was able to familiarize myself with the changes in the law and talk to the housing consultants, and they identified it as part of the scope that they were going to do. And frankly, it's more within their wheelhouse and their expertise. It's a good trade-off. And so the timing is just working out well. That I was nervous about it, so I prioritized it early, and then we've been able to kind of make some adjustments as the realities behind it have come to light.
Okay, thank you. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Harvey.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for this detailed report. And it's always helpful to know, especially when there's a bright red line, what's above the line, what's below the line. And if we want things, kind of moved around. My question has to do, it's a little bit hard on some of these things that are not started or added, exactly how much resource they'll take, and or whether or not we could add other resources to it to achieve that. So I don't know what I'm, kind of asking for, am I asking for $1 million and, 10 people, or am I asking, for a little bit of resource that maybe we could go out and add and supplement to our staff. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, because I don't know, if we can help monetarily to move some of these along or not.
Yeah, I think it would be almost a project by project situation where, one of my concerns right now is I have a lot of developers telling me they're going to be filing large applications in a very short time frame. And so I'm trying to kind of marshal some of the resources we have on staff to be able to respond to that, because there's state mandated timelines that we have to respond to those folks with. But that's been going on for about 6 months, and not a lot of things have materialized. And the other kind of tool we have is the ability to use contract planners to respond directly to those development applications and have those developers pay for those services out of pocket of their cost. And then we can use internal city resources to work on other priorities. All that being said, we are holding a neighborhood meeting for subdivision on the south end of town tomorrow, and I do anticipate that to get going. And we've assigned senior planner Harry's to that too, because he's been working on it with that developer for a while now. So I guess if there's other priorities that are below the line that the council would like to tell us to explore ways to try to get going, then I'm happy to do that. It'll probably be a combination of trying to find internal resources and then trying to maybe see what external resources we have that we could bring on and then their cost. One of the other constraints that we're dealing with is just when the economy is really busy, all the planning firms and consultants are really stacked up. And so I have a couple meetings scheduled for early November to see kind of what resources we could get going. And then just so the council's aware, we also are recruiting for that halftime position that the council basically made Joel Galbraith's position permanent for the department, which I'm really thankful for. But I just don't know what type of, if we're gonna be able to fill it or, you know, the level, because we listed that as anything from entry level to a senior planner, because we weren't sure, again, all the uncertainty in the labor market right now, we were just trying to cast as broad a net as possible. So I have a lot of irons in the fire to try to respond to, I guess, priority shifts. And so if the council wants us to go ahead and keep looking, I'm happy to do it. But right now, the red line, I think, is what I'm comfortable biting off without.
So I guess it comes back to if we were willing to give additional resources, I guess, to get these, as Damien pointed out, move up a couple of these items. What is it that it would take for us to do that?
Well, and that's why I gave you a long-winded answer, because I just don't even know what's available right now.
You don't know.
I'm trying to find out. Generally,
okay,
planning consultants are about $100 an hour, between 100 and 125. And then we did put FTE equivalents to some of these items in the original budget document, so we could give some hard number estimates with a little bit more head scratching if we were told to look specifically on a few of them.
So let me ask this another way. So some of the stuff that's above the line that's not started, are any of those things that we could push to get these things? Can we trade? I'm asking.
So, Council Member Harvey, so if you're referring to like packet page 224 and the one that's
right.
not, yeah. So like, well, a multifamily stream. So we can run through this real quick. The housing financing model is kind of related to this. Right now I would say that we're not recommending moving immediately on that, just because some of this could come out of the housing element work, and also some of it could come out of that GAPA workforce housing conversation with Burbank Housing. I think.
Well, some of it also could come out of, things that the state is working on, because housing, and in particular housing financing, I think there's a lot of chatter around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely when you're talking about, housing financing generally, but in particular, when we're talking about mixed income or, workforce kind of housing, that in particular is really challenging to try to finance. And historically, right. It's, you go around with your hat in hands to, a whole line of different governmental agencies. And it's a very long, painful process and uncertain too. So,
right.
That's just not, if your intent, if the state is serious about, funding the kind of housing that they say, they want, or the kind of housing that we want, whether that's, straight housing or it's mixed use development, we definitely need to, have some better models for financing that kind of thing. So
agreed.
Yeah. So, just, I guess why I'm just saying that I wouldn't recommend starting that immediately is just because there's some things that we're working on that will, I think, tie into that same conversation, both the housing element work that we'll be doing, as well as the work that's already underway. But we don't have an end date on it yet, but it's like I said, the workforce housing. So that's one, for example. The multifamily streamlining ordinance, that hadn't started as of sort of the writing of this report, but it's imminent. And that's grant funded. So I think
And I would also, it's an action item from the current housing element. So it's something that we haven't even got to yet that we committed to 6 years ago. So we did feel it was important, especially given the grant timing.
That's fair.
Yeah, so it will start soon, but it just hasn't yet. The cannabis ordinance review and tax resolution, I think, if you put on your sort of economic sustainability, economic viability hat, that one's an important one to not neglect, because they have, that industry is a significant source of revenue, and it'll become more over time. And it's been part of the council's long-term strategy for, fiscal sustainability. So that one is still
it's part of our mix of, diversifying our revenue.
Yeah, exactly. Diversifying revenue, and also is one of the very few opportunities to create new revenue in a relatively short period of time, as opposed to, property tax and sales tax. Generally speaking, that's almost a generational project, as opposed to, as the council had identified the cannabis business tax, as well as hotel transit occupancy taxes, as those two taxes that are currently, or at the time, were not in our revenue mix, that could relatively quickly in the scale of things, turn on and help in terms of fiscal sustainability to kind of pay for the whole show, to pay for all the services that the community wants. So that is an important one, and we do still tend to want to get to that, but these other priorities have pushed it into the second half of the fiscal year. And then economic development 2.0, that one just, I don't know. I don't know about that. That's I think generally, it's generally important. I don't know if I'd say it's time critical, but it's just stuff that I think we want to get to. And this is primarily revolving around it's a pretty broad net, but some distinct projects that we've talked about in the past is the West Side Industrial section, and sort of dealing with some zoning consistency across the two sections there, as well as along Redwood Drive on the freeway facing businesses, allowing some retail components there, and continuing to just allow additional flexibility. I mean, we're all sort of figuring out what our new retail environment is, and some of our zoning isn't really well suited for what the future is looking like. So it's really updating that stuff, and it is important. That might be one, that might be one thing where, maybe there's a way, with funding consultants or something, that there might be a way to, expedite
Get it started, but with consultants.
Potentially.
And I would agree with that. The one thing I've been telling Damien is there's just so much uncertainty. The retail and those types of businesses were already floundering and trying to find their new normal. And then the COVID situation, it's, what I don't want to do is spend resources moving in a direction that then doesn't provide benefits to the community, because there's so much unknown of what's going to be coming out of the COVID, the new reality coming out of that.
So is that one maybe we should wait a little bit on? Since we're not out of COVID, to your point?
I don't think it's super time critical, but I think it's something that we can't lose sight of.
Okay.
And, maybe as we get into next calendar year, we can start, giving some more thought if things start normalizing again.
Well, and I would add, we had that in the last two budget cycles, because in 2019, when we did the zoning work, we said, okay, we're going to have another step to this to make some of the changes that Damien pointed out. But then COVID hit, and we very quickly had to retool that effort to try to assist the existing businesses and see what we could do. So even though what we think it is now, we have time with, we don't know what it could be. And so having,
right.
And it just gets to some of the broader points that I think are highlighted in the staff report about, we have our list, but we need to be flexible with it.
Thank you. Councilmember Sparks.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, make sure I was thinking about this right, because it feels like we're looking at the page 224 of the packet and sort of talking about how to move things around on that. But am I understanding right that page 228 is sort of your recommendation of how to move things around? Like maybe that would be a good starting point for the conversation. Is that later page?
Yeah, well, 228 is the page of the budgeted items, or the things that we talked about in strategic planning and budget, and then move forward on, plus all the other things that were sort of added in the in the planning realm. And so and the highlighted projects are based on, as both Noah and I said, just based on what we've heard from the council so far, just our recommendations on which ones we would suggest moving up in time priority and which ones could slide down a little bit to try to accomplish at least what we believe the council's goals are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or clarifications from the council? I'm not seeing any hands, so at this point, I'll open it up for public comment.
Thank you, Mayor Moore. Looking to our attendees tonight, please use your raise hand icon or dial *9 if you'd like to make a public comment. Jenny Blaker, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the city manager for such a detailed report and for thinking so much about the gas station prohibition issue, which I'm glad to see moving up. And although I wouldn't want the county to slow Cotati down, it sounds like a very good idea for Cotati to also be working with the county at the same time to push them forward. So I hope that goes forward as a priority. Thank you very much for considering it so seriously and strongly. I had a question about the agricultural zoning, and I'm not sure, well, at least I'm not sure what this is about in detail, but just in general, I hope that this means that the city might be moving towards allowing more small-scale farming in areas where it hasn't been before, because small farmers doing sort of organic farming and veggie box schemes and things like that closer to the city would be wonderful. And I hope that more of that will be allowed, given, of course, all the considerations about, well, the details, the case-by-case details. But that sounds like a really good idea rather than waiting for the next general plan review. That's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. And that agricultural zoning amendment does incorporate what you were referring to, Ms. Blaker.
Neil Hancock, go ahead.
Yes, hello. Very educational to hear all the varieties of activities that are going on, and yeah, how to simplify it really is what I'm sort of hearing. I kind of agree with the discussion on the economic development, that maybe that's a longer term sort of view. Things are changing. I think we're going to get more of this in the future, of just how do we cope with basic changes for streamlining things for more of a simplification and focus on reduction in energy usage. And there's just a lot of historical momentum on that. So I of course, am promoting that the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan update is very, very valuable. I think, and impacts has a 5-year horizon when you start thinking of the fact that it's something that impacts the state when it comes to Caltrans along Highway 116. So anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity to comment, and I'll end my comment there.
Thank you very much.
Mayor Moore, that will end public comment.
Thank you. With that, I will bring it back to the council. Damien and I had talked about this a while back, and there was just so many things coming up and so many things coming at the city all at once. It's like, okay, how are we going to prioritize this? We've got a limited number of staff that wear multiple hats. A lot of times we do have to contract out because we don't have the resources there. If in fact we have an opportunity and we have allocated a 0.5 FTE for development, maybe we look at doing a 1.0 FTE. If you're able to find a decent candidate, maybe something you could bring back to the council. Hey, I got this wonderful person that's willing, but they don't want to work part-time, and they could fill all these avenues. I would certainly look at something like that. And even if we're on a limited term basis, some people are fine with working for a couple of years and then they're ready to go elsewhere. With that in mind, I am comfortable with the suggestions on packet page 228. I thought we could wait on the gas station, but I'm willing to concede that. I don't see anybody looking to build a gas station right now. And on the agricultural zoning, I understand that with some of the concerns on there, seasonal concerns would come into play. So I think that makes sense to look at that in the first quarter of 2022. But I'm open for discussion and questions. Councilmember Ford?
No, I was just going to say I appreciate the work that staff put into rethinking this and trying to figure out how to incorporate into the work plan the priorities we've been expressing in council meetings. So, as you said, Mayor Moore, I'm in support of the reordered list of priorities and timeline on page 228.
Thank you. Councilmember Harvey.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all the work in putting this together. And I agree, the priority list on 228 is helpful. And I also like your suggestion that if we can find a candidate, rather than half-time, to have them work full-time if they're a great candidate, I would be open to listening to that proposal to kind of get some relief here and get some of this stuff moving, because we want to make this department be successful, and with all this stuff going on, I think that we need to resource appropriately.
Thank you. Councilmember Sparks.
I just want to express my support also for this, for the listing that you've come up with here. And I would say that the agricultural zoning amendment is, I know, very urgent for some folks in our community. And so the earlier that could be done, I think the better. And the new gas station, I don't know what the likelihood is that we would have a gas station come in the time between now and when we can get this done. So it doesn't seem quite as urgent to me as the other issues, as the other issue right above it. But I'm supportive of this listing. Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. So based on that, it looks like you have the direction going forward, Mr. Obid and Mr. Hausch. Thank you so much for preparing that. Sometimes we fail to see all the things that we throw at you guys, but I think this is a good way to look at that and prioritize it going forward. So, thank you. And now we go on to item 10E, discussion on county redistricting. Before we get into that, do we need to have any breaks, or are we okay? Looks like we're okay. Okay.
All right, Mayor, so members of the council, and I'll just be brief. So this was just an item of timely opportunity, because the county supervisor supervisorial seat zones, their districts are being redrawn right now. And this happens, so all political boundaries, essentially, all these, state level, federal level, and even county supervisor level get redrawn every time there's a census every 10 years. And so that data was actually quite late. It didn't become used. There wasn't a usable version of the census data, even though this ARC subcommittee was formed by the supervisors to manage this redistricting process. The actual usable data didn't become available until like around September 20th. I think the first maps were available shortly after that in October 18th, actually. And then, and because of the statutory deadlines to adopt the new boundaries, which is December 15th, everything is super speed at both the ARC and the Board of Supervisors. So even though the ARC just got their really first set of maps that were available to the public on October 18th, by the time we have this conversation, it's already moving from the ARC to the Board of Supervisors to start their public hearings. So there's a really small crack of time where if we have any particular interest on the supervisorial district boundaries, now's the time. And just as a point of reference, I think we all know that we're in District 2 entirely. This is David Rabbit's district currently. And it might be relevant for you to know that Roner Park is split between two districts, between Chris Coursey and Rabbit, Districts 2 and 3. And they're actually having a similar conversation tonight about the districts because their particular interest, what they feel is a community of interest, is that their entire city is just in one district rather than split between two. And so I would anticipate if I would not be surprised if the council, if the Roner Park Council ends up sending a letter suggesting that they're included in one district. It's not quite that simple. I mean, they look at a lot of different demographic information, both population and demographic details, ethnicities, things like that, to draw their district boundaries. So I don't know if Roner Park will, if they do make that request, if they'll have any traction. But I thought it would be at least a good conversation to have before the opportunity passes us by. And I think the conversation primarily is if Roner Park is successful in consolidating into a single supervisory district, would it make sense for Cotati to also be in that same district, or would we want to continue to be in District 2, for example? I think there's pros and cons to both. I think generally speaking, culturally, we're probably more aligned with Petaluma, but Roner Park is similar to us in a lot of the topics a lot of the things we're dealing with right now, such as, we just had this conversation about the SAFE team, social services, homelessness, all these things we work through the county on, and so does Roner Park. Petaluma is an entitlement jurisdiction, and so we don't usually engage with them on those issues because they're sort of doing their own thing and they don't have a common interest in that respect. So anyway, I guess I'll just leave it there. And the item is, if there is any particular council interest, to just provide direction and we'll carry it out. So I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Abid. I did think the demographics were pretty interesting in this packet here. I will open it up for any council questions or clarifications. Not seeing any. So with that, I will open it up for public comment.
Looking to our attendees tonight, please use your raise hand icon or dial *9 if you'd like to make a public comment. Mayor Moore, that will end public comment.
Thank you. And I don't know that there's any concern or request to change anything on our existing district boundaries at this point. Pardon me, I spoke too soon. Councilmember Ford.
Well, I'd say I think it's a good exercise for us to think about sort of in what alignment we might sort of have more input into county processes, because I don't feel currently like Cotati is, has much of a voice at the Board of Supervisors. And it does seem that in many things, Roanoke Park is a more likely partner than Petaluma. That being said, I'm not sure that that the need is strong enough to spend any political capital by composing a letter to the board and perhaps alienating our current Board of Supervisors representative or anything like that. So I think it's a good exercise for us to think about, but I'm not sure there's an action for us to take.
You're not inferring that it could be potentially political, are you? Councilmember Sparks?
Thank you. I'm just really curious to hear from the other council members on this, on what you think about this, because I, as a new person, I'm really not too knowledgeable about what the implications would be. It always struck me as odd as a Cotati resident that we and Roanoke Park were represented in 2 different districts. And if you walk 100 feet from my house, you're in a different supervisor district, which is just always seemed a little strange to me. But I'm just curious to hear what some of the potential downsides would be to switching or requesting to switch, other than the I guess maybe including possible political downsides or just, I'm not sure what I'm asking. I just want to hear what you, who are more knowledgeable than me, think about all this.
The only thing I could add to that was that my understanding was that primarily the districts were composed of the number of constituents in each particular district versus political culture. Going back, Santa Rosa and Petaluma have always been, or previously were at opposite ends of the political spectrum. And so maybe that's how some of that district got drawn previously, some of those districts. But I think now, personally, I think we have a greater collaboration with the surrounding areas and the communities, especially through the mayors and council members. And as Mr. Obey brought up, with our SAFE program as a prime example, working with Petaluma and Roanoke Park and Cotati. So I don't know that it is such a hindrance in the way the districts are drawn now. So I don't necessarily have any inclination to try to send anything that way. But if there was a compelling enough argument, I would certainly be willing to listen to that. And apparently there isn't a compelling enough argument. So with that, I guess we'll leave it at that unless you want to add to that, Mr. Abib.
Yeah, I don't know if I would consider this a compelling argument or not, but I think at least from Roanoke Park's perspective, their interest, aside from not being split between 2 supervisory districts, is to have their entire population, because it is primarily split along population, equivalent population lines. So, they seem to be primarily interested in ensuring that they can use their population to demand more attention, essentially, from the Board of Supervisors. And, maybe if Cotati's population were combined with Roanoke Park, that might make more sort of weight to the central county supervisory district. But whether or not that is, at the end of the day, whether that's something that is preventing us from collaborating effectively regionally, I don't really have an opinion on that, because I think we still do collaborate effectively in most cases.
Yeah, much more so than in the past, I think. Councilmember Harvey?
Yeah, and I guess I just would add that, at least from my perspective, I don't know if it helps or not, Laura, but we have had a tendency, oops, I lost my, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I lost my things. We've been going on too long. We've had a tendency to be able to work with all of the supervisors. So even though David's our supervisor, depending upon what the issue is, we may reach out to a different supervisor to get different things that we need. So I agree with John that, you know, kind of regionally, we've been able to work through it. As you all know, on a lot of our JPAs and things, there's a county representative. So we've built relationships with all of them, if you will, and don't necessarily rely on one specific one for what we need. A lot of times it's, you know, dependent upon what it is the subject matter is, who we would go to. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's just my perspective.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay. So I think we're going to sit pat, as they say in poker. If that's a general consensus on that.
Yeah, you know, one more thing I'll add too. I mean,
too late. We're already sitting.
As we're just throwing out like hypothetical scenarios, I mean, there's also a potential benefit for, you know, let's say Roanoke Park becomes District 3 and we're District 2. If we have mutual interest, then potentially we have two supervisors that we both can talk to push issues independently as well. So anyway, it was just one of these issues that I just didn't want to see pass by without at least having a conversation about it.
Councilmember Sparks.
Yeah, and Damien, thank you. And Damien, as you mentioned, you know, potentially adding our population to Roanoke Parks I think just psychologically the number wouldn't seem that much bigger to someone to where maybe the benefit of staying in a different district and having the ear of another supervisor might be more than the benefit of adding our numbers. So that's sort of causing me to lean towards sitting pat, as you said.
Because as John pointed out, it's not as if we added them together, we would be able to form a, what did you call it, middle district, you know, a central district, because there's still not enough, you know, it wouldn't put us up there to make a separate district in and of itself.
And I also think if you look at some of the other districts and then our district, there are more things that are probably in common versus District 5, which is a large swath of area where you may have so many different competing concerns, you know, in different directions.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if Roanoke Park was in a single district, they would still have to pull, even if we were in the same district, they'd still have to pull in South Santa Rosa to get to that roughly 100,000, you know, population threshold.
Okay. Well, I think you've got direction needed on that. Thank you for bringing that up. It's always an interesting conversation. And you never know what that's going to look like down the road as demographics may change. Okay. So that brings us back to you, Mr. Obid, and the city manager's report.
All right. So a reminder that the COVID testing site is still up and running Tuesdays and Wednesdays, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. at the St. Joseph's Park and Ride. Appointments are highly recommended there. We kind of danced around it, but and I'm sure the council members will talk about this today or a little bit more in their reports, but we did have a ribbon cutting today for the mobile mental health crisis response team for our cities. This is modeled after the CAHOOTS program. It's accessed by calling 911, and the services provided by SAFE include, this is mental health clinicians, EMTs, and so nobody carries a gun in the SAFE team. So it's basically a civilian response for people who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol in need of treatment of mental illness or need shelter by providing counseling and transportation to the appropriate location. Also addressing minor medical complaints and trying to, basically, it's a I think a good way to think of it is it's the ultimate, upstream service to try to catch people before, a medical condition, gets so bad that they end up in an emergency room. That's the most expensive way to treat something, and as well as using the EMS system. And on the other side, trying to, try to intervene with people in mental health crisis before there's either, they end up getting arrested, or then it goes into the court, law system, or worst case scenario, there's a bad interaction with law enforcement and that person is injured. So anyway, that ribbon cutting was today. And then just a little update on the storm. So the storm was great. All of our water and sewer systems performed well. There was no sewer overflows, anything like that. The storm drain system performed well too. There was some minor flooding, but nothing significant. Just to be expected with the volume of rainfall. Our primary drinking water reservoir is Lake Sonoma, and the levels did go up. We were at around 101,000 acre feet, and went up. It's currently up about 120,000 acre feet, and it's still rising, although that level of increase is tapering off. So it's good. We're not out of the drought yet. We need probably several more storms like this to get us out of the drought, but it's a good start. So hopefully we can keep it up. We talked about the groundwater sustainability plan tonight, so I won't talk about that, but also the next thing is a West Side project. So that $3.7 million project that the council awarded is underway. And I expect that the work on the east side will resume shortly, provided we have continued good weather. So that is Condor Court, Robin, John Roberts, and getting those roads reconstructed. And so that's going to be, this project, as you know, is reconstruction. So they're going to mill up the entire roadway and recycle it in place, recompact it, and then bring in just a new asphalt lift for the top. So that will hopefully be going again shortly. And wayfinding signage, again, that's the downtown directional signage, as well as the kiosks at the trailheads, Laguna de Santa Rosa trailheads. And so that is still on track for November, December installations. Cotati has, we conducted a gray water installation last Saturday, and this for a property in Cotati. And then we have some lawn transformations that we're offering for 2 residents. And so people can sign up for that. Applications are due by the 29th of October, and they can find information at dailyax.org. The housing element, like you all know, is going, and there's a sign up for people that are interested in tracking that, and that's on our website. The Bike and Ped Master Plan is also underway, and there's a sign up for people that want to track that, which is also on our website. On recreation, we have Camp Cotati Thanksgiving break registration open, and that's going to be Monday through Wednesday camp during the Thanksgiving week for children that are out of school, but their parents are not. And the camps are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. each day, and they're held at the community center here. Space is limited, so sign up early if you're interested in that. On Friday, kind of going a little bit out of order chronologically here, but Friday, December 3rd, we're hosting an in-person holiday tree lighting in the Plaza Park from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. And we're going to have horse and carriage rides, food and craft vendors, free cookies, hot cocoa crafts, and for children, of course, a visit from Santa. So we're working on that right now. And then also more immediately on Halloween, October 31st, we have Cotati Candyland. And Ashley Wilson will be very proud of me for saying that properly. I'm always trying to say City Halloween, and I somehow fumble that, but it's Cotati Candyland, which is the event in the Plaza Park, and also a lot of businesses downtown that host the event and hand out candy for the young ones. So there's a daytime event, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. We do plan on also, in addition to our city staff being down there handing out candy, we also will have police staff down there and also safe team staff down there for the families to talk with and interact with. And this year, we're also going to be hosting a costume show every 30 minutes on stage at La Plaza Park, and for the little kids to show off their costumes. And then carnival games in La Plaza Park also. That's hosted by Rancho Cotati High School, their ASB club and management events class. And there's a lot more information about all this stuff online under City Hall, City News. You'll find the city manager update there that has a link, has the summary that I just gave you with links to all the different resources and information. And also as these things come up, they're also on social media. So there'll be a lot more information for people that want to participate in any of these things. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Abid. The Candyland event, rain or shine?
Rain or shine.
Okay. Thank you. If there are no questions for Mr. Abid, we will move on to City Council member reports. Councilmember Harvey.
Well, my first report was that we put out the draft Sigma plan, which you guys got a presentation on, and we had a meeting on 10/14 to have more public comments. So there was public comment on 10/13 with the community meeting and on 10/14. So good stuff there. On 10/21, I went to the Sonoma County Waste Management Agency meeting, and the MOU, which I asked to be brought back, it is one item. The other item, it's kind of complicated, and it'll eventually come before us. But as you'll all recall, the county had the agreement with Republic, and when they did that agreement with Republic, the fee for the Waste Management Agency was in the county's agreement, which we are not a part of. The JPA wasn't a part of it. The cities weren't a part of it. So what that did to the agency was that they capped the fee at what was in there, and therefore it didn't allow us to change our fee, which is really unworkable for the things we need to do from a household hazardous waste perspective, as well as all the changes coming down for SB 1383. So we just couldn't move forward with that. So the county negotiated with Republic to sort of make some changes there, and they are going to then allow us to up our fee. But what they are reducing has to do with SB 1383, which will go back into our franchise agreements. And that's why it gets a little bit complicated. So when that comes back in there, I'm sure, Damien, you can shake your head, but I think that will come back to council as those changes happen because of 1383 and thus the financial part there. So the good news is we were able to change the cap and stuff is moving around, and you know, it never belonged in there like that. So this will really help us out for the next, 25 years, which is great. So, and then lastly, today I attended the Cal Cities League Leaders, and that was really interesting. They kind of went through all of the stuff that happened in 2020 and the beginning of 2021. And they broke us out into little rooms, if you will, to talk about what our goals might be for Cal Cities for the 2021-22. So I don't know what everyone said, but more will come on that. But that was really, really very interesting. So that's all I have. And the safe thing was great. Thanks. I'm so happy, and I can't wait to get our first report on that when they start doing their thing.
Thank you. Well, I'm not seeing any other hands up. I do want to thank the council members that were able to participate in the mayors and councilmen's meeting last week. Yeah, it looks like hopefully we'll get some sort of a good program coming up through the continuum of care for the homelessness issue, and that board will hopefully adopt those recommendations that came out. So I do appreciate the support on that. And then of course the ribbon cutting, I thought was fantastic. It's such a great program, and looking forward to that. And that's all I have on council member reports. And if we don't have any further at the moment, we will go to public comment on non-action agenda items. Ms. Burgess, if you'd be so kind.
Thank you, Mayor Moore. Looking to our attendees tonight, please use your raise hand icon or dial *9 if you'd like to make a public comment. Mayor Moore, that will end public comment.
Thank you so much. And then we don't have any further information received after the agenda was posted.
Nothing further.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for a good productive meeting and prioritization. I think that's going to be great. And I will adjourn our meeting at 9:28 p.m. Everybody have a great evening and a great weekend.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
Happy Halloween.
Thank you.
Bye.